go.
Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Dracut Arts. With me today is co-host Tom McGarry, author Jacqueline Dembar Greene, and ASL interpreter Shelley. Jackie is the author of more than 40 books for young readers, including picture books, historical novels, mysteries, nonfiction, and American Girls Rebecca series. With a passion for history, she almost always builds her stories around a pivotal moment from the past, with rich period details. Often her books bring to life a neglected period in Jewish history. She always strives to create an engaging story where readers feel as if they've been steeped into a different era and experienced life at that time. And I can tell you she's very successful with that. Many of Jackie's books have won national awards. Her most popular titles include the historical novel, Out of Many Waters, and 1 Foot Ashore, companion novels set in 1654, the Rebecca Rubin series set in 1914, and The Leveler, which takes place in Westborough, Massachusetts in 1789. And her newest book, an historical novel, Walk Till You Disappear, set in the Arizona Territory in 1872. Jackie is a frequent speaker at schools, book fairs, and conferences, and has taught numerous writing workshops for adults. In addition to her writing, she enjoys photography, gardening, hiking, and traveling to destinations off the beaten path. Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be able to talk with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Could you talk about how you became a writer? Didn't you start out as a teacher?
I did. I always wanted to be a French teacher.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure exactly how that came about, but yeah, I was a French teacher for only a year and a half or so, and I taught at Brighton High School. So if anybody out there remembers me, I was in room 303. I enjoyed it very much, but once I had children, I kind of moved on, and it sort of never presented itself as another opportunity to return to teaching. I started writing for a local newspaper when we lived in Westborough, and while I was working for that paper, what I enjoyed the most actually was writing feature stories where I could focus on an individual or two and their experiences, something extraordinary that happened to them. Growing up, I had never met an author. I never heard a teacher or anyone talk about writing as a career in any format, as a journalist, as an editor, as a copywriter, nothing. And so I never envisioned that as a realistic opportunity or career. And I did like to write. I always liked to write, and I was always writing. But one of the things that also happened to me as a younger student is that whenever teachers would give us the opportunity to write something creative, they would always say, write what you know. So I was growing up in Bloomfield, Connecticut, a very rural town. And I thought nothing ever happened to me of interest. I don't know anything about any other place. And I guess I don't have anything to say. As an adult, I am constantly drawing on my life experiences from when I was a child and all the way up.
Oh, wow.
What I learned was it's not write what you know, it's write what your passion is. And when you want to write about something, you can always learn what you didn't know. That's the easy part.
Wow. So how did you pick writing children's books as kind of your main focus?
I think that my audience chose me. When I write, I really don't target an age group. I did always feel that I was aiming for a younger audience, but at the same time, I never wrote down I
No.
never tried to not use a word that a young reader might not be familiar with.
Yeah.
I love using words as poetry so that, for example, in a picture book, you should be able to read it out loud. And if your listener or reader doesn't know all the words, they're going to get the spirit and the feel of it. So one of my favorite phrases that I put together for a picture book called What His Father Did was raggedy vagabond. I'm pretty sure that most kids don't know those words. They might, but it's doubtful. But the response that I would get when I would read that out loud to a group of 6-year-olds was tremendous.
Yeah.
And they hear it and they feel it. And so I guess I just kept writing. I just wanted to add to that whenever I write something, I always feel that if an adult didn't read it and enjoy it, why would they want to share it with a child? So every book should have multi-layers. And the youngest reader may mostly just get the plot and follow the experiences and the adventure of the character. On the other hand, the older child, the older reader may see experiences in there that they can relate to more or think about more. And an adult should be fully engaged and feel as though the book speaks to them as well. The first thing that I wrote started out as a short news article for a local Westborough paper. And it was about a legendary figure named Tom Cook. He lived in Westborough in the late 1700s, and he had a very unusual history. The people in the village were superstitious, and they believed that the devil walked the earth and was constantly there tempting people to try to do the wrong thing. When Tom was a 3-year-old, he had a fever that was considered to be fatal. And after the doctor left his family one last evening and told his family to be prepared that the child may not survive the night, the next morning he was miraculously better.
Wow.
And instead of people rejoicing, a rumor started in the village of Westborough that Tom's mother had sold his soul to the devil in return for his recovery.
Wow.
This is all part of historical legend in Westborough. I did not make this up. And Tom spent the rest of his life being ostracized in the village, but using that situation to help other people without them knowing who had helped him. So he felt that he was taking things from wealthier people who had too much and giving them to the people that had too little. And so when he was called a thief, he said, "I am not a thief, I'm a leveler.
Oh, wow.
I level off the fortunes of those who have too much with those who do not have enough." So when I wrote this newspaper article, the entire story of what kind of a person Tom Cook must have been stayed with me. And I turned it into a short story and shared it with a former professor of mine who read it and looked at me, and she said, "You know, you're wasting your time." And I felt myself shrink up until she said, "You're wasting your time as a journalist. This is not a short story. This is a novel.
Oh, wow.
I think you're afraid to write it." And shortly thereafter, I decided that I was going to write, and that sort of gave me the push to make the leap. And not too much longer after that, I left the newspaper job and started writing full time. And Tom Cook's story, The Leveler, was my first historical novel.
Oh. You write a lot of historical stuff. Have you always been drawn to it, or did something happen beyond the Tom Cook story, or did you, I don't know, deliberately choose it maybe?
I really like history, and I like feeling that there are stories of people's lives embedded in history. And whenever I read something that happened in some past time, like with Tom Cook's story, I feel as though there's so much more that needs to be known. I also have done a lot of reading on Spanish Jews. My family on my mother's side are Sephardic Jews, which are Jews who came from Spain and Portugal. And after the Inquisition in the late 1400s, they scattered around the known world at the time. Although I had asked many questions when I was growing up, I never got many answers from my family. And so as a young adult, I started reading quite a bit. And I found such a wealth of information about different time periods and how parts of history were influenced and changed by Jewish people who had left Spain or Portugal and ended up in different locations. So Out of Many Waters and 1 Foot Ashore came from that research. And the stories then find me while I'm reading. So I was sitting in the American Jewish Historical Library when it used to be at Brandeis quite some time ago. And I was reading how a lot of Jewish children were kidnapped from their families, even if the families had converted. And they were sent away to remote colonies where their parents could never find them.
Wow.
You couldn't just hop on a plane and fly to Brazil.
No.
And once they were there, they were usually put to work at monasteries. And the pretext was that they were being raised as Catholics without any corrupting influence. But in fact, they did laundry, they cooked, they cleaned. They certainly couldn't leave. And while I was sitting in the library thinking about this horrific chapter of history, it was almost as if two sisters entered the library, walked in and sat down at my table and looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to tell their story.
Wow.
And that's
And
what
that's how those two books came to be. Yeah. So I started with the time when they are escaping from a monastery in Recife, Brazil, and they end up on different ships. So the first book, Out of Many Waters, is about the younger sister, Isabel, and she ends up on a ship that historically left Recife, Brazil, with 23 Sephardic Jews who were trying to get to Amsterdam. And 16 ships set off, but one of them was lost in a storm, and through a harrowing set of adventures, ended up in New Amsterdam, which of course is New York City.
Right.
And at the time that they landed there, they were the first group of Jewish settlers to come to the New World.
I
So
found it fascinating. You said it's called the Mayflower for the Jews. And I was like, that is really cool.
Oh, wow.
yes, that's where they had no intention of being there, no intention of going there, and no intention of staying. But by the time they got there, it was late fall, and they were out of money. So they had to stick it out for a good while, and they just stayed.
Yeah, and one of them founded a temple, a synagogue there that still has
That's correct.
its presence known, even though it's been rebuilt or whatever. I was so thrilled and happy to hear that. That's wonderful.
Yes.
That's
They had quite a lot of influence. They actually were able to influence some laws and rulings that were made so that they were more inclusive.
Mm.
They made their presence known in a quiet way. They were a small group, but they were successful, very successful.
Wow.
Well, Holland was also very accepting of people of differences, right? And different religions and different ways of being. And
Yes, to a point. To a point. There's always
this
a
little-
limit.
Mm.
Yeah. The companion book, which is called One Foot Ashore, in that one, I followed the adventures of the older sister, Maria, who is 16. And she lands in Amsterdam looking for her sister,
Oh.
believing that they will find their parents, because she knew that her parents were going to try to leave Portugal and get to Amsterdam.
Mm.
But what she discovers is that it's not so easy. She doesn't speak Portuguese. She doesn't speak Dutch. She's having difficulty navigating. And in her story, she ends up living in Rembrandt's home.
Mm.
He finds her on the
It was
street.
fascinating. That was so fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, he lived in the Jewish quarter, and
Mm.
he
Ah.
would go to services every Saturday at the Jewish Portuguese synagogue
Huh.
to look for subjects for his painting,
Oh.
because he felt that their appearance reflected what would be the biblical appearance of people from that time.
Huh.
So when he was doing a Bible study for a painting, he wanted those Portuguese Jewish models.
Mm. Wow.
And he was best friends with the rabbi from that synagogue, who was Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel.
Mm.
So it was more than logical
Mm.
that everything fell into place.
Yeah.
And the place for Maria to end up was with Rembrandt.
That's neat.
Cool.
So you've said that you love to travel. Is that part of what comes into the stories? Because you have other books about Arizona and about the Indians, Native Americans.
Yeah, I have
always
some
wondered-
nonfiction books on Native Americans. I've been traveling to Arizona since the early 70s,
Wow.
regularly.
What did
And
you do down there?
originally, I had an aunt who moved there because of a family situation with asthma.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
And it was
Yeah.
1948 or something.
Whoa.
And these days, there's plenty of pollen in Arizona, but
Oh
in those
yeah.
days, there wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody that moved there wanted to plant things that they remembered from back east. So,
Yeah.
but they lived out there, and I always had a little fascination with Arizona. So we started traveling there when our kids were very small.
Hmm.
And I learned quite a lot about the Native American tribes that are there, and over time developed connections with different groups.
Hmm.
So some of the information was sparked by the traveling, and then it worked in reverse. I would be working on a book that had something to do with either a Native American tribe. For example, I did one on powwows.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
I
You have a lot
traveled-
of factual books too about bears and powwows and other things like
Right.
that. Great.
yeah, the powwow book, if you can see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's powwow.
Yeah,
I love the photographs in there.
Mm.
this one, I did most of the photographs as well.
Oh.
So I do a little photography. I'm not great at it, but I've had some good luck.
Hmm.
So I have done several books that had to do with Native Americans. And as I read more, what led to the newest historical novel, which is called Walk Till You Disappear, came about because I had an inspiration that made me realize the connection between Native American tribes who were being forced to change their beliefs, change their way of life to follow what the missions were trying to teach them and convert them to, along with the Jewish people who were facing the same situation over time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to find a way of showing that similarity without it being a religious story or anything that disparaged one religion or another or a tribe or any group. And so I came up with a story that is about a 12-year-old boy who's being raised Catholic, and his family has a large horse ranch that has been handed down in the family since an ancestor came over with the conquistadors.
Wow. Wow. That's a long time.
It's a long time. And on one evening early in the book, there is a visitor who is a Jewish German peddler. And he stays at their home overnight, being welcome to stay there during his travels. And the main character, Miguel's father brings out an old leather-bound book and shows it to the peddler and asks him if he thinks he might be able to read it. And as the peddler is reading the Hebrew letters that spell out Spanish words as a secret code, Miguel discovers that the ancestor who came with the conquistadors was actually a converted Jew who was kidnapped by the Inquisition and brought to the New World to serve with the conquistadors.
Wow.
He becomes so upset, so distraught, that he runs from the house. He jumps on a horse, rides off into the desert, and promptly becomes lost. Through a series of adventures, he is very lost on the desert and he's injured. And he is found by a young Native American boy from the Tona Otom tribe. And this young man is running away from a mission school. And the main body of the story is the two boys traveling across the desert, trying to get back to their families, and how Miguel begins to see heritage as something that can be embraced and can have something to show us about who we are and where we've come from. So it's a pure adventure story. They catch a rattlesnake, they eat it for dinner.
Hey, Tommy,
There's scorpions. There's lots of scorpions in Arizona.
yeah.
Although the biggest scorpion I ever saw was in Mexico. And I did work with some native tribes on these books, so that there would be feedback to make certain that everything was accurate and that nothing was in any way offensive or disparaging and inadvertently.
No, you're very respectful that way. I can tell.
It's really important. It's really important.
Because it's so easy to misunderstand a simple thing. Because if you didn't grow up with something, you just don't know.
Right.
And sometimes even if you do grow up, you take certain issues for granted and you don't realize the full impact of them until later in your life too.
Or the background. Maybe it's something that's just been accepted and you never know, or you didn't realize why it was a practice or what it reflected. So you might get it wrong when you try to portray it.
Yeah.
So it is very important, I think.
No, it definitely
And satisfying too. You learn a lot. You meet some great people.
I bet. I just was thinking of when I looked at the breadth of all your books and their content, I was thinking Jackie's been all over the place.
I haven't written about all the places I've been, but I should keep going. We've been to Egypt quite a lot, as I
Oh.
have a son who lives there, and we've made the most wonderful friends. But as much as I've learned about Egyptian culture and as comfortable as I feel there, I haven't found anything that I think is my story to tell.
Hmm.
Maybe someday that'll happen, but so far, as I say, a lot of times I feel like the characters and the stories find me, and
Right.
my job is to tell it.
Yeah. When you said, I don't have a story to tell yet, I was remembering what you just said earlier about the two girls walked in the room and looked at you,
Right.
said, now you need to write the story about us.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of information gathering that you did before that happened. And in a
Right.
way that's happening with Egypt too. There's all this information coming, all these ideas, all this love and enjoyment of the culture that will just feed something that's just waiting on your shoulder. I can kind of see it over here, Jack.
The wheels turn, but they haven't been turning quite fast enough, I guess.
Well, there's just so much food there. I mean, and the other point is really understanding a culture. I mean, I had a thought, well, maybe you need a co-author to do a book on Egypt so that you really can embrace that in a way that I don't understand, certainly.
Yeah, I feel like if I wrote about anything that was up to date, I would probably get it wrong. And if I pulled something historical, I don't feel as though I have anything that would be unusual enough at this point. There's so much written about Egypt,
There is.
you know, going back to the time of the pharaohs and so forth. So, but maybe one of these days it'll happen. It hasn't happened yet, but it could.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
And do you actually put, as of an adult who's read some of your children books, you are very wonderful at portraying from a child's point of view. Their inquisitiveness, their observing of everything around, and they're not understanding something, so then you go and explain it. So that pulls the reader to not feel ignorant of a term or a situation that happened. And that's a wonderful gift. It's just fascinating how your stories flow together. I really, really enjoy them so much.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear. One of the things I like to do also, which draws on my background as a foreign language teacher, as well as a foreign language student, is that I like to use foreign words that are appropriate in the stories. And I always try to explain them so that they're clear. With the Spanish, for example, I've got some Spanish phrases and words in Walk Till You Disappear. Those I feel as though a lot of people will know. Spanish is so prevalent in the United States these days. But at other times, for example, in the Out of Many Waters and 1 Foot Ashore, using Dutch words, using Portuguese words, I always tried to make sure that the context explained it, or somebody asked because they didn't understand.
Right, I love that.
It's good. I've gone and talked to students at schools where there's inevitably at least one student who speaks a different language as their first language or as their family language, along with their English. And you can't imagine how their faces light up when they have recognized a word or phrase that speaks to their family and to their heritage. And it's so wonderful to see that.
Yeah, it's very important.
It really is. Yeah.
It's been wonderful talking with you,
Yeah.
Jack. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We look forward to your reading and Q&A at our January Arts Saturday. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, especially the Massachusetts Cultural Council grants as administered by the Billerica and Dracut Cultural Councils. If you'd like to be a sponsor, please email us at dracutarts@gmail.com or visit our website, dracutarts.com. More information about our Arts Saturdays and other programs can also be found there.